Hello, everyone. It is Marc Sabatella from Mastering MuseScore here. I'd like to thank you all for being here for the MuseScore Café. So this is the date of the 17th of August, which is the third Wednesday of the month. So we're going to be doing a version of what is our my kind of traditional thing to do the third Wednesday, which is focus on one particular score and all the issues that come up with that score. So the score we're going to do, and I think I'm going to be trying to, we're kind of making this up as we go along, refining what we're doing, but now that I've got this music engraving workshop, and I think I'm going to keep to the idea of working on one project a month to give people time to really get into it. So we're going to look at that score, the score that we're working on this month for the workshop. And it's a Mozart string quartet, a particular movement. It's one of the quartets that's being looked at as part of the Open Score String Quartet project. And so it's certainly possible that some of the work that gets done as part of this, part of people working on it might get contributed to Open Score. We don't really have a process exactly how that all might work, but yeah, we're going to figure this all out. So thanks everyone for checking in here. I love to see all the comments where people are coming from and so forth. So what I want to do is I'm going to show you a little bit about how I'm going to set up my screen first for doing the transcribing, because that is an issue in itself. Okay, just how to get your windows going, because I've struggled with this and I've tried different approaches, and for a while I remember trying to use an approach where I was using MuseScore's split screen feature to let me look at multiple windows scores at a time, and then I was capturing an image and pasting that into one of them, and that kind of worked, but yeah, no, I'm trying to maybe simplify the procedure and also maybe make it a little just work better. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this. I'm going to close my palette window here so that right now I have the maximum amount of MuseScore real estate here, right? I have, I've closed the inspector. I've closed the palettes window, F8 for the inspector, F9 for the palettes window. Now, I also have my own special editing workspace here. What I like about my special editing workspace is I've combined everything onto one toolbar. I've customized that, and I think I've showed before. In fact, I know I've showed before that customization. But I'm going to go to just one of my standard workspaces. So I have this workspace called Café that is the one I usually use for these demonstrations. So I'm going to go ahead and close those side panels in my Café workspace. So this is basically just the advanced workspace, but it's one that I'm going to be able to customize. Okay. So, and I currently am not displaying MuseScore full screen, and that's why, because I want to be able to see the chat too, but I'll probably go to full screen periodically and then back, just because it's a little difficult sometimes. Whoops, wrong button. Let's try that button to see everything I want to see on screen while also seeing the chat. But we'll see. So here's what I'm going to do. I am actually going to resize my window a little more to vertically show two sides, so that I can show just MuseScore. So I can look at just MuseScore on the bottom. I could do it in either order, but I think this works better for me. And then I am going to open the score itself in the top. So I'm going to go to the score, which is on IMSLP. And if you're not already familiar with IMSLP, I did look up what it stands for. And no, it's Internet Music Sheet Library Project, something like that. P is for project. M is for music, I is for internet, and I still don't remember the rest. But let's see, I actually forgot which one, 64, 138. It actually took me right to the right one, but then I scrolled. So I can view this now, and the movement we're going to be looking at is the third movement. So I'm scroll down until I get there. And then what I'm going to do is resize this window as well to kind of tuck it in. So there's this nice feature my system has to let me kind of pin these windows, but it only kind of sort of works. And Chrome OS is looking at improving this feature, but for now, this is what it is. All right. So now I can see basically a little bit of the score and a little bit of MuseScore at the same time, and that's kind of working for me. So I now want to create this movement here, and so it's a string quartet. So first thing I'm going to do is go, actually, the first thing I want to do is make sure you can see my keystrokes. How's that going to work? Yeah, I think what's going to happen is they're not going to show up because they're hidden. Is that true? Yeah. Looks like I can only go down that far and let you still see my keys. So this is going to be a little bit of an experiment, but yeah, we'll see. All right. So what I'm going to do is just use the mouse more, file, and narrate what I'm doing a little bit more. So I'm going to say File, New, and I don't know exactly how we're going to label this because eventually all the movements are going to be combined. So I'm just going to call it Menuetto. That's not really the title of it. It's really kind of a tempo/style marking, but I'm just going to enter that, and I will enter Mozart's information here. And under the templates, I'm going to pick the string quartet template. Now, I know there's also template versions that are provided for the OpenScore project, and so I'm trying to split the difference. I don't want to exclusively talk about how things work in OpenScore, but just know that there might be a special template to start from there. But I'm going to say it's in 3 flats, key signature time 3/4, and there is 1 beat of pickup. So there we go. And there's way more than 32 measures. I don't know how many, but I'll just say 100. We can add more later. And I'll go ahead and add a tempo marking so I can edit it later. Okay, so I have, and I'll zoom out a little bit so I can see this a little better. So I've got my score here, and I have the PDF up here. And I'm going to start entering some notes myself, and then I'm going to jump and start talking about some of the things that other people ran into and talk about those issues. And we'll see if some people want to come on and talk about further issues or, give their feedback. So yeah, people who have already worked on this for the engraving project, I may be inviting you up later if you like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the first violin part because that's where so much of the action is here. And I'm just going to start entering some notes. So the first thing I'm going to decide is, do I really want to use page view while I'm entering, or do I want to use continuous view? And I think I'm going to switch to continuous view. To be honest, I don't use continuous view a ton. But it is probably a good choice for things like this, the basic basic info. So Malu, if you're trying to find the live session, if you need to go. If you go to the community, so community.masteringmusescore.com. So community.masteringmusescore.com is the homepage for the community, and then you should see a link up at the top left. So I'll even type that in here. Community HTTPS community.masteringmusescore.com. That's where all the action is. Okay, so I'm going to start entering some notes. And so I can actually kind of zoom in here if I want And I'm not going to worry about the tempo. I'm not going to worry about any of the other stuff, the text and other things. I'm going to get that later, right? I want to get right to the notes because that's where the action is. So I've zoomed in here, and my first note is the E flat, and it's quarter note, E flat. And I'll go ahead and enter the grace notes too. So to enter grace notes, I usually use the shortcut slash. And slash will enter a grace note. But you can see a couple things have happened. First of all, it enters that grace note at the same pitch, and it's the grace note with a slash through the stem, which is actually what we want. These are not appoggiaturas. These are fast grace notes, right? And so they should be played fast. If you enter them using, let me just actually show you the palette. I'll open the palette with F9, and if I open the grace notes palette, you'll see there are grace notes without the slash, and including ones that say 16th notes, but they're going to play as appoggiaturas, meaning they're not going to play fast. So I'm still going to enter it this way, and then I'm just going to hide the slash. So I've entered one. Let me change the pitch. So I'll select it, down an octave, down another octave, and then up a couple steps. So control down was down an octave. And now I can press 3 to change it to a G. And now I'll enter another grace note by pressing slash again. And this entered as a 8th note, so I can press 3 to change it to a 16th. So now I have 2 16ths, and now I can change this one to what I want, which is that E flat there. Now I can select that slash and press V to make it invisible. And now I have what I want, where it plays quickly. Had I done it the other way, just so you can see the difference, it may or may not be noticeable at this tempo. Let's find out. Actually, I'm curious, from those of you who did this, I didn't even look at this. Did any of you do what I just did? Did you enter it as the short grace note, the acciaccatura, and then hide the slash? Or did you leave the slash? Or did you do the other thing, which would be to actually enter the 2 grace notes from the palette, change their pitch, and let's hear what this one sounds like. No, that actually sounds pretty good. So it sounded surprisingly good. But if this had been a longer note, that actually worked too. I'm surprised because I actually thought, yeah, I'm actually a little surprised that it worked both ways, and I'm not sure exactly why it worked, but okay, it does. Maybe if you add multiple grace notes with the 16th, to be honest, I don't know the answer. But this is how I entered it, and it worked, and I'm going on. So go to the next measure, go back to note input mode, and 6, G, control down a couple times, add the E flat. And now, because I've already entered all this business with the grace notes and all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select that. So I started with the grace note and then use shift right to select the range. And I'm just going to press R to repeat that passage. And by doing that, it's now repeated that passage, including the grace note and all. And now, of course, these aren't the right pitches, but what I'm going to do is select those pitches, and I'm going to use the shortcut and to raise diatonically by a step. I don't want to raise by half steps, which is what up arrow does, because from G to A flat is only a half step, but from E flat to F is a whole step, right? So it's a different number of steps. I want to use the diatonic transposition, and that is normally Alt up arrow. My keyboard uses Alt up arrow to do all this fancy stacking of windows. My computer does, so I can't use Alt up arrow. I've customized my shortcut to be Shift, Alt, and the right bracket. But when I hit that, it will transpose that diatonically. Now going on, I'm going to enter, click this note, go back to note input mode, and then 4 for 8th notes, C, control up an octave, B flat, and then whoops, wrong note, Control Z, bum 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 ba-dum 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 and then finally a quarter note, bum. So I just entered all of those eighth notes, and I kind of sang them while I did it. Yeah, just because I do, but more than just because that, it also helped me recognize when MuseScore played a note that was different than the one I was singing. That's how I knew I got a wrong note in there, because I sang one note and MuseScore played another note, and I trust my singing more than my fingers on this. That may or may not always be true for everyone, but it's a good reason to have good oral skills. Okay, so now I want to look at what I've done and decide what needs some work here. And what needs work here is actually a couple of things. One is the beaming, and the other is the slurs. Now, it is possible to enter slurs while entering notes. If you press S while entering notes, MuseScore will slur as you enter the notes. I'm sure it's efficient, and I'm sure I could train myself to work that way. I just don't. I just don't do that. So what I'm going to do, up arrow. Yeah, I get that. Okay, I could totally see that. So what I normally do is I enter the slurs after the fact. So the way you would enter a slur is you enter usually the whole range you want it to apply to, and then press S. There are some issues with grace notes, but if I enter the range, including the grace notes and this, and press S, you'll notice it didn't really work right, because the problem is, as far as the range goes, these grace notes are not part of the range. If I press S, nothing appears to happen. Peter's asking about the slash. No, there's not two slashes. There's always only one slash. I changed it to a 16th note, so there's two, flags or two beams, but there's always only one slash in a grace note. I just made it invisible because, at least when adding a single grace note, typically if you add the appoggiatura version here, it plays slowly. But I don't know. I'm actually okay now. Now I'm really kind of doubting myself, and I want to find out what happens. So I'm going to enter two of these. And one of them, I'm going to enter this. And the other, I'm going to enter this. And change it to a 16th note. And hide the slash. And this one plays like I expect. How about this one? All right, so that one definitely played slowly, right? But what happens if I add a second grace note to it? So it appears, and I never knew this, that if you use multiple grace notes like this, it does play them quickly. And it plays them quickly regardless of the length of the main note. But if you have only one of those grace notes, it does the appoggiatura thing. And I don't think I ever realized that before. And maybe that was something that was changed relatively recently. I don't know. But I'm glad to have learned it. All right. So I'm coming back here, and I want to get that slur in there. So as I was telling people who were working on this in the workshop, the way to get a slur over the two grace notes and the main note is to control click. So I click the first note, control click the last note. And if you have exactly two notes selected, MuseScore will draw the slur between them. Now, this doesn't look like the slur is going to the main note there, because the stem direction is opposite of where the slur is. But if I hit X to flip the slur above, you can see the slur really is going to that E flat. So it just looked a little funny because it was connecting to the stem, and the stem is so close to the grace note when it was below. So there is my slur. So I clicked one note, control clicked the last. That idea of adding a slur by clicking one note, control clicking another, know that one. It's very useful for other purposes too. Like you can have slurs that cross staves. Let me flip over to my MuseScore Café for a second. If I wanted to slur from this B flat on the top staff to this, no, I meant to control click. So I've clicked this B flat, control clicked that A, hit S, it will actually draw a slur across the staves. So, which is sometimes needed in piano music. Also, you can connect slurs between voices that way. So this idea of clicking one note, control clicking another is a good way to enter, I don't know, interesting slurs is, I guess, the best way I can describe it. Slurs that are not just easily done by selecting a range, because usually selecting a range is the way to do it. So for instance, okay, now I'm going to do the same here. Click, control click, press S to add the slur, select the slur, X to flip it up. Now I want to add these other slurs. And for the two-note slurs, there's a nice trick. Selecting a single note and pressing S just adds the slur. So I can do that for this next slur, also the B flat. For the next slur, I want it over 4 notes. So I'm going to select that whole range, and I'm using Shift right to make my range selection. And now I'll type S. And now S. And make my range selection, S. And S. Range selection, S. S. Now, I see what looks like a dot there, but is that just a speck or is that a staccato note? So I kind of think it's just a speck, because then I see this other speck here on the G. What do others think? Because I know other people who have worked on this. I don't think I noticed that, but I think that's just a little speck of dirt that got on the scanner. That's what I think. I don't think that's really a staccato mark, but I could be wrong. Guess we'll find out if we see that same passage occur later on. Okay, so I've got those in. The next thing I notice is that the notes are all beamed together, right? So the notes all being, whoops. Okay, what am I doing now? Notice I think I'm dragging something. What's happened is I meant to just sort of be moving my mouse, but I accidentally dragged, and the F was selected. And in doing that, if you select a note and start dragging it, what you're doing is you're adding or removing leading space adjustment. And unfortunately, that's actually hard to remove. If I just select that F and hit Control R, it doesn't remove it. So, Bob, good observation, Bob, that the fact that it's not perfectly lined up does suggest it's just a speck. So, if you accidentally start doing that, dragging something around sideways like this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the inspector, F8 to open the inspector, and now you'll see the leading space adjustment here, and I just got to clear it. And that's going to reset that thing. And now I can close the inspector again. So if you do find yourself accidentally adding these leading space adjustments like that, the inspector is the way to get rid of them. All right, so what I was really trying to do was just scroll, because what I wanted to do is point out about the beaming, right? These eighth notes are all beamed together, and it's pretty consistent, right? Always eighth notes are beamed together across the entire measure when they're existing that way. Now, I do want to look and see what happens if there's, say, 4 eighth notes and a quarter note. You know what? I'm not going to worry about it, because there's just a lot of measures where there's the whole measure is full of eighth notes. Here's a quarter note and 4 eighth notes, and all the eighth notes are beamed together. Here's one measure where kind of inexplicably the eighth notes are not all beamed together, and so we're going to have to override whatever we do. But I want to show you how to make my default be all the eighth notes beamed together, because that's how this editor has done it. We're going to copy that. Now, would I do this in my own music? No, I would change them to default to 4 plus 2. So in other words, the first 4 eighths beamed together, then the second 2. That would be my normal default in 3/4. MuseScore's default is 2/2/2. That's fine. And this editor used all 6 beamed together, which is common in older music. So what I'm going to do is right-click the time signature 3/4, and then time signature properties. And this brings up this dialog, and now it shows you pictures of what your what your different rhythm values look like. And all I got to do is click on a note to either connect it or disconnect it. So if I wanted to disconnect the first 2/8, I would click that, and now they're disconnected. Of course, I don't want that. What I want to do is connect the third one. So I click it, and then connect the fifth one, and then OK. So now all my eighths get beamed together. So Malu, what happened was I clicked a note and then dragged with my mouse. That's what caused it. So clicking a note and then dragging it is not something you should. In fact, we've disabled it from MuseScore 4. It was such a pain in the butt that people would accidentally start dragging notes around like that we just disabled it. All right. So Colleen is turning into a pumpkin in the sense of going to her other class. Is what I think that means. But yeah. So I've now beamed these now the way I want them. However, what you're going to find is when I did that with time signature properties, it only affected that one staff. It doesn't affect the music, the same music on other staves. So if I had some eighth notes, for instance, in Violin 2, oops, eighth notes, right? Violin 2 is still showing them connected. So I want to show you a trick. This is a good trick that works at least in MuseScore 3. It might be changing from MuseScore 4 how this all works, but at least in MuseScore 3, it's the case that this works one staff at a time. So what I'm going to have to do is copy this 3/4 to my other staves. And normally you can't copy and paste time signatures, but there is a special operation that we refer to sometimes as cloning. And it's the same operation you use to customize your palette. You can use Control-Shift-Drag to add something to your palette. Well, you can also use it to drag from staff to staff. And notice what happened. Let me undo that. See these eighth notes here and how they're all they're grouped in twos. If I now Control-Shift-Drag that 3/4 down to the Violin 2 staff, boom. Now I just copied that time signature along with its customizations. And now I can do the same to copy to the viola and the same to copy to the cello, which I just learned is pronounced violoncello, I think is the best way to pronounce that. And maybe someone who's a native Italian speaker or just a really good Italian speaker can see if you can correct me on that. But via, the via is sort of one syllable. The I and the O kind of are a diphthong a little bit. Violoncello with the accent on ch. Violoncello. Of course, we usually just say cello. Maybe Maureen, you could hit me onto the better pronunciation of that. But violoncello is what I just learned yesterday would be the way to pronounce the full Italian name of the cello. All right, I'm going to delete those extra notes there, and what I'm going to do is what I see coming up is kind of stuff that looks very similar to what was already there. So I'm actually going to use copy and paste. But before I do that, I might as well get the dynamic markings in there. So I'm going to select the first note. Okay, so I'm going to do the naive thing, which I would like to work, which is select the grace note and then open my palette with F9 and then go to Dynamics and click the F. And I would like it to be the case that the F actually appeared under the grace note, but it doesn't. MuseScore doesn't have a concept of how to align dynamics with grace notes. It's just going to align it with the main note. And so now we're going to get into some of these manual adjustment things. So there's a couple ways. Yeah, and I've only ever said cello either. But I know that, in scores, it's listed in the full Italian name. and then abbreviated like VC or VLC or VCL, something that, you know, indicates that full name. So I would normally, if this were my score for my own purposes, I would have to think, well, is that good enough? Just putting the dynamic marking on the main note, are people going to understand to play the grace notes loud too? And I might decide that's good enough. But if I am trying to copy a score exactly, I'm going to look at that and say, you know what, I'm going to need to make a manual adjustment on that. But if I'm doing it for OpenScore specifically, you know, there is this general don't do manual adjustments much thing. So Maureen, I would love to know your call on this. Was that manual adjustment worth making? Because I'm going to do it. I'm going to click this thing and I'm going to use Control Left to push it to the left until it's more or less under that G. So I did 2 Control Lefts and it moved it under the G. I feel like that's a pretty safe adjustment as adjustments go, but if we're trying to avoid adjustments at all, we would avoid it. So that's the call there. Then the other question was about this slur. This is not necessarily the most attractive slur I've ever seen. Of course, right now I'm in continuous view, and that throws things off a little bit, but it's no better in page view. In page view, it's not very attractive. I would probably want to move that endpoint up a little bit. You know, just change the curvature around of this. But I would only do that if I was really concerned with the appearance of this score. You know, like I was going to print it and hand it to someone directly. If this was then going to be handed to someone else for further processing, like happens with OpenScore, then that's maybe not something that you would want to do. So yeah, I'm definitely curious about that. All right, so I've entered that dynamic marking, and then the next one is a piano on the C. So click the C, click the piano, and I now have basically the first, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 measures entered, and the next 6 are very similar. And of course, the original had a larger page and smaller staff size, so it was able to fit more measures. I could do that, but yeah, I might as well do that. Show you how. I'll go to page settings, and this is where I would change my. I think I'll change to. Yeah, it was some weird page size. I could enter it, but I'm just going to change to letter and make the staff size smaller. 1.5 millimeter, good enough. So, oh, I was frozen and I'm back. Sorry about that, but I'm glad I'm back. Okay, I don't know how much got missed, but one of the things I was asking that maybe got missed was I was asking about that manual adjustment on the dynamic marking that I made. I added under the E flat, moved it under the grace note. Definitely worth it in general. Well, yeah, arguably worth it in general. But the question is, was that wise for OpenScore purposes, or is the don't do manual adjustments really kind of hard and fast rule? And so not even moving that F under the grace note would have been doable or advisable. And then the same question about the slur. The slur is not very attractive. I would probably fix it for my own purposes to look a little better, but for OpenScore purposes, I probably wouldn't. But Maureen would love your input. Okay, so I did that copy because it's similar to the other passage, but it's not identical, right? Would beaming 2 and then 4th, beaming 2 then 4 be notationally appropriate? So that's a good question. The beaming rules are pretty subjective in 3/4. 2 plus 4, I've seen one source recommend that. Most sources recommend 4 plus 2. But I have seen at least one source recommend 2 plus 4. I can't remember which one it was. might have been the one that we're using in Music Engraving Workshop. Might have been that. I've already forgotten the guy's name. German name, fun to pronounce, but I've forgotten it. Werner. No, I've forgotten. So. Yeah, if your editor has chosen 2+4 and you're the engraver, then by all means go with it. But if you're the editor and you're making this choice, I would really think about it and maybe consult some more literature in that genre. Like when I talk about consulting the literature, just where the slurring is? Oh, that's a good question. That's a good question. Good question. So to be honest, that could be a reason. If in general we're beaming all the eighth, and that could be why they chose to do that one differently. But I'm not really sure why the one slur they actually chose to do differently. Maybe it's because there was a dynamic change in the middle of it, and that's why they chose it. And they thought a slur wasn't a good enough reason. To be honest, I don't know their logic. But I use the Norton Anthology of Western Music to get a quick overview of a lot of music. And I can thumb through this a little quicker than I can browse through IMSLP, but I will use IMSLP for a deeper dive. But I'll just look at different music. Like here, the first thing I opened is a Mozart piano sonata in 3/4, and it also has all the eighths beamed together. But I would be looking for some string music in 3/4 to see if I could find good examples, and I will settle for other things that maybe aren't in 3/4, but give me an opportunity just to see to what extent people change the beaming occurring to the slurring. The general rule with 3/4 in modern music is show either beat 2 or beat 3. Okay, so either show beat 2, meaning beam the first 2 eighths, then the second 4, or show beat 3, beam the first 4, then the second 2. And when in doubt, show beat 3. But the reasons to show beat 2 could be if that allows you to avoid a tie. If showing beat 3 would require a tie, but showing beat 2 doesn't, then it could be okay to show beat 2. And maybe slurs become an extra reason also. So there you go. All right, so, but these are great questions. So I've entered this passage and then repeated. Oh, the comment about the slurs being different. Here's the thing. I think this isn't literally true. I think we are being fooled. So if you look at this slur here and this slur here, they're both connecting the first grace note to the main note. They're just been drawn a little differently, or the scan is just a little off, right? Like you can see, like it looks like the ink sort of dried up here. And so either literally it dried up in the print and it's bad on the paper, or the scan just missed a few pixels. But I think this slur really does continue as far as this one. I don't know for sure about this one, if this one really goes down as far, or if that was just the typesetter, the engraver just did it funny. But the same is true here, right? I mean, the slurs look visually different, but that's totally just an accident of the engraving / printing / scanning process. I would not be in a hurry to copy those sorts of details. I have 16th grace note slurs. Those are 16ths versus 30 seconds. Oh, you're right. They're 30 seconds. Thank you for pointing that out. I think I wasn't zoomed in far enough to see that. Well, easy enough to fix. 2 is a shortcut for 32nd. And that explains, I was wondering why my slur didn't look as ugly as you all's did. It's because the 32nd grace notes, then the slur comes further down the stem and looks even uglier. And that's why mine didn't look as ugly, because my 16ths aren't as ugly. So change this all to 30 seconds by pressing 2. And now my slurs can look just as ugly as everyone else's. There we go. All right, so what I want to do here is I want to finish this phrase showing my process and then have some more discussion here. What I want to do is point out that this passage here is quite similar. I'm going to go back to continuous view, because it's going to suit my purpose better. And then notice that, okay, when I did the copy, it's the same for that E flat, and then the same chord, and then the E flat again. And then the chord, though, the second chord is different. Instead of A flat and F, it's E flat and C. So I'm tempted to just fix that. Whoa, what am I doing here? I'm using the cursor key and nothing is happening. Oh, the book with the scores here. This is the Norton Anthology of Western Music. This is sort of like a required resource in a lot of music history courses.
Continue on your personal device. I'm having a bit of trouble here.
Interesting.
Please try again.
It is probably the most well-known, most well-respected printed collection of scores that you will find used in music history courses and so forth, where you can get a lot of music to look at through a wide variety of styles that's professionally presented and all. There's other ones, but the Norton Anthology is definitely probably one of the biggest, one of the most well-known. So that's what I use there. But now I'm having trouble here, and I've never encountered this before. My cursor key is not working. And I'm wondering, well, are all my keys not working? Please type out the whole name of the book. Okay? Will do. Norton Anthology of Western Music. So obviously my keyboard works. And can I type? I can type into the palettes. And now the cursor key is working, so fine, whatever. Something got locked up, but I'm fixing that chord now. But now I've got all these eighth notes that are different also. And so you might think that I'm a little, I don't know what the word would be, but I'm going to look at this and notice that the shape of this line is exactly the same, except it's a fifth higher. Is that literally true? Well, it's certainly true from here to here. Exactly the same. Oops, I meant to use shift. So click that note, shift click this one. Exactly the same, but a fifth higher. So I'm going to use that diatonic pitch up to just pop it up a fifth. That was how I fixed, that's how I fixed the pitches there. But I'm going to guess that that's not literally going to be the case everywhere. So sometimes I would also use repitch mode. In repitch mode, like I would click a note here, and then under the note input menu, I can go to repitch mode. And now I can just type new pitches. So if it's supposed to go E, D, C, G, A flat, F, G, B, E flat, all you have to do is retype pitches while you're in this mode, and it replaces the existing notes while keeping the existing rhythm. That's the nice thing about repitch mode. And it's very useful when entering music like this, because you're going to see the same passage used. Like, it's going to be pretty common to see things like the second violin and the cello parts. What happened? Did I skip right past? Here we go. If I enter the second violin part, then the cello part, I mean the viola part and the cello part are essentially the same rhythm, different pitches. So I could use repitch mode in there. It's not exactly that, so I may or may not find it useful. But there are probably places where they are same rhythm, different pitches. And repitch mode is often great for that because it lets you just keep the existing rhythm. So you copy and paste and then just go to repitch mode and change. But I'm going to go back to regular step time now because I always forget to go back to regular step time, and that'll bite me. But unfortunately, it doesn't actually continue the rhythm that way. If I look at the original, it really only was 2 measures of eighth notes, and then it changed to something else entirely. So I'll just go in here and enter the new notes. And remember, you don't have to delete anything because MuseScore is always kind of overwriting things. So I'll just leave the junk that I just entered there and enter what I want, which is a quarter note, 5, and then A, but up a half step to A natural, and then F, up a step, and then F again, and then a dotted eighth note, so 4 dot, F, 30 seconds, so 2, G, A, up a step, quarter note, B flat, and then I'll call that done. And in the process, it removed the slurs because the rhythms didn't match. If the rhythms had matched, it would have kept the slurs, but it removed them, which is fine. So now I'll select that passage and add that slur. So that's that. And I haven't saved this thing yet, and that's bad. I would never normally want to go that long without saving something because, you know, crashes happen, bad things happen. You've seen them happen to me many, many, many times. So I would come here and say, save them to the folder that I would save them to. And so here's my version that I've now saved. All right. So I want to toss this up for some more discussion here. So Peter has a good question here about scrolling. My best method to make MuseScore the active document again. Alt-Tab is always my thing. Alt-Tab quickly flips between windows, right? So Alt-Tab is usually my friend here. And the thing is, if I were really smart, I would make these so that, and right now they are such that they are completely, they are touching. As I said, my system makes that kind of relatively simple to set up where all these windows are like perfectly proportioned now to kind of exactly this, the size of this one, the size of this one, and the size of this one on the side. They snap to each other. However, there's so much wasted space by all these toolbars and this toolbar and all that, and I haven't, frankly, optimized that. So Alt-Tab is really good for changing focus for sure. And that works on all operating systems, Windows, Mac, and Linux and Chrome OS, which is what I'm using here. So Alt-Tab is always my friend there. But what I also want to do is I really want to simplify this toolbar. And so I mentioned that I have my special editing workspace, which is simplified to only have one toolbar. And I like this one. I use this one quite a bit. MuseScore 4 doesn't quite let you do this. It lets you do some other things. But anyhow, this saves a little space. I actually find I have another workspace that I've created called Presentation, which gets rid of the toolbars entirely by putting them off to the side. But I do need the toolbar for some things like accidentals. So at some point, I should probably come up with a special version of this toolbar that has the accidentals here so that I have kind of the maximum amount of vertical space. And then what I really need is a PDF viewer that is not my that is not just my browser, right? Because this is basically my browser. Yeah, so it's wasting way too much space. So I want a PDF viewer that doesn't have all this extra stuff associated with it. All right, so what I want to do is find out what other questions there are from people who have done this. Is there autosave in MuseScore 4? Yeah, MuseScore 4 is exactly like MuseScore 3. They both autosave, but they autosave not like saving your real score, because that would be kind of disastrous if you like made a bunch of changes that you weren't sure about. So the autosave in both MuseScore 3 and 4 is a disaster recovery method, where if there's a crash, then yeah, when MuseScore restarts, it'll offer to recover from your crash. But I don't want to rely on that. I want to know I have my own copy, the file, the one that I gave my own file name to and put in my own folder. I want to manage that one myself. So I save often. And then, yeah, MuseScore manages its own autosave to help recover after a crash. It does that in MuseScore 3, does that in MuseScore 4. Yeah, works the same in both. But don't rely on that autosave. Well, it almost always works. It almost always works, but it can lead to confusion because you've got two copies of your score. Now, if you have to rely on the autosave, now you're recovering from a different copy of your score, and now there's a chance that you've got two different copies. You look at your recent files list, you might have two different copies going there. It's sort of a recipe for confusion. So I ignore the autosave unless I make a huge mistake, like work on something for an hour without saving, and then I have a crash, and I have no choice but to use the autosave to recover. And then the first thing I'll do is go ahead and save that explicitly to make sure it really is updating my real copy, not that special autosave copy. So, good questions. And yeah, if anyone else, so incremental saves with unique names that you can go back to older versions. Now there, instead of that being built into programs, operating systems always provide that. So Windows provides something called OneDrive that will do that for you. Chrome OS provides Google Drive that does that for you. Mac OS provides something called Time Machine that does that for you. Different Linux systems provide different utilities that do the same thing. So that's usually your and then it works on all programs. So most programs don't bother to implement their own version of that because the operating system does it for them. So on Windows, I use OneDrive for that. On Chrome OS, which is what I'm using here, I use Google Drive for that. And yeah, you can always restore previous revisions that way also. But that's a little different than autosave, because if you didn't save it, then there's nothing. That's more revision control, right? Because if you didn't save it, there's nothing for the revision control to go back to. So yeah, I'm wondering if Peter or anyone else who has been working on this wants to ask any other questions. Oh yeah, so Alto Clef. Yeah. So here's the thing. I don't read Alto Clef well. But what that means is I don't know what these notes are. I can't just look at that note and know what it is. I can sort of, but eventually kind of learn. You know I can do the math. I can say, oh, middle line is C, counting down, that's a G, and then type G. So I can totally do that. And the more I work on a score, the better I'll get at it. But here I will typically use mouse because then I don't have to know what the pitch is. I can just, did I put it in the right place? Yeah, and then 2 empty measures, and then another one of those things. And I'm just clicking these notes in. I'll still use the shortcuts for the durations because they're nice and easy. So I will do this. I will totally use the mouse for that. However, that said, let's be a little logical about this also. So the next note I need to enter is this guy right here. So I don't know for sure what it is, but I can tell you the middle line, the line that I want to call the B line because I think in treble clef, I can see that this note is a fifth below it. So I want to think, well, on alto clef, that middle line is a C. This note, therefore, is an F. An F is a fifth below C. So I'm going to type F. Got it right. And now, watch what's going to happen. I'm going to enter those rests, rest, rest, rest. So I just entered an F. What is this note on the top line? Well, it's an octave and a step above the note I just entered. I just entered an F, so this guy must be a G. So for G, up an octave. Sure enough. And now I can kind of read. So G, and then it's down a step, so that must be an F, and then F, and that must be an E, and an E, and that must be a D, and that must be an E, and that must be a D. I'm reading the contour of the line so that independent of knowing what the notes really are, I can kind of follow them based on what the previous note one was. Only when there's a big leap do I have to think harder about it. So yeah, I can use the keyboard to enter alto clef notes. I just have to work harder at it. Okay. Yeah. So Peter, you had your question about the parenthetical. dynamic markings, and yeah, you had asked before about them, and I said, well, I didn't really know what they were for, but there's also the question about getting them to line up. So let's see, where are you talking about? The end of the trio. Okay, yeah, right here. So there's a passage where there's some eighth notes, and let me just go in here and enter some eighth notes. F, A, C, D, B flat, A flat, B flat. Okay, and now you're entering this crescendo marking starting on the A flat. So I'll enter the crescendo marking, and it basically goes for the rest of that measure and another measure. So I select that range and then go to the palette, open the lines palette, and crescendo. And now I'll click that crescendo marking and close the palette, but open the inspector and edit the text to say parentheses crescendo. Close that sucker. And now your question is, doesn't lining up? Okay, so this one seems like it lines up okay, but you're asking about the one at the end. So you've got the last note is a P, is a quarter note, dotted quarter with a piano underneath it. And if you edit this to put the parentheses there, it messes up the alignment, right? Because by default, dynamics are centered under things. Well, first of all, if you look at this, looks like they had the same issue. I think they're not totally centered either. I think they have something that's not too far off of what we have, to be honest. I'm not sure, by the way, why this line is so far below the staff. Is it? Oh, it's because we're in continuous view, and the algorithm for trying to align these things is getting confused, I think. I'm not going to worry about it right now. But yeah, so I would probably need to adjust that manually if I wanted it to align a little better. Sometimes, though, instead of manually adjusting it, I will cheat. To me, what I'm about to do works well enough. I'm going to open the inspector, and the default for dynamics is centered. But if I set it to left aligned, it looks like the dynamic is centered under the note. It's not perfect. And if this had been a PP instead of a P, oh, by the way, you don't type P, type Control-Shift-P to get the special version, right? You can tell it's left aligned and not centered, but if it's just a single letter, the difference between left aligned and center aligned is minimal. And so if you're allergic to manual adjustments, that's a way to get something that looks reasonable otherwise. But frankly, I was fine with this also. So yeah, there's not I don't have a one size fits all answer for you here. All right. So Marla's asking about the bass range. So you're trying to adapt something and take something that's, or was it originally a harp part, but it was written for a bigger part than yours, and you're trying to adapt it, or you're trying to take a piano part or something else and make it work for harp? That's like its own question, right? Kind of more of an orchestration question, but I'm happy to address that in the future. But for now, I think we've covered more than enough here. And what I'm going to do is go back to my theme music and start on the winding down process here. So the things that I showed here are things that, you get to see a little bit of my process of note entry. You got to see some of the specifics of this string quartet and the project of what's involved in working on these things for OpenScore specifically, where we want to be careful about doing manual adjustments versus when we want to do manual adjustments because we know that they make sense. And so there's a lot of different aspects to this sort of thing, and I wanted to show it all. So hopefully you found some useful things in here, and That's what we're going to be doing. I think on these third Wednesdays, I'll be focusing on whatever we're working on for the workshop, so y'all can see some of my process. In coming weeks, I'm going to be showing more about MuseScore 4, talking about some of the new playback features, talking about some of the new engraving features, and so forth. So that's something to be looking forward to. We're planning, from what I understand, on having a beta within the month. So like it's not going to be the beta and then the final release are going to come on are going to be coming close on each other's heels is the theory here. So we'll see how that goes, but that's the plan. So yeah, I'm going to be showing off some of this stuff. Just stay tuned and I'll just keep trying to show you interesting things about using MuseScore. Come join me for the music masterclass tomorrow. We'll be looking at some vocal harmony as well as some music that people have created and having a good time. So thanks, everyone. See you next time. Harmony as well as some music that people have created and having a good time. So